What is up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Assemble Performance Podcast. I'm your host, Justin Jones. Whether I'm hitting the trails, training for an ultramarathon, or pushing my limits in the gym strength training, I've always been fascinated by what drives us to perform at our best. This podcast is for everyone, from the serious endurance, strength, or hybrid athlete to the outdoor enthusiast who wants to live life to the fullest. I believe that peak performance is an assembly of physical training, mental fortitude, emotional health, and social support. Whether you're training for a sport or viewing life itself as the ultimate athletic event, join me in redefining limits and living a life full of challenges and adventure. Let's get into today's podcast. What's up, guys? We've got the first guests on the podcast. We've got Chris Soto and Joe Dzubak. So Chris is a former D3 cross country and track and field athlete, and he went to NCAA cross country nationals. He is a certified tactical strength and conditioning coach, and his focus is on hybrid training. For the last 4 years, he has run a free online training group for aspiring military, law enforcement, and fire candidates. He's also coached one-on-one clients for various military selection courses. Some of his notable clients have included a Navy EOD officer, Navy SEALs, an Army Ranger, and multiple candidates for other special operations forces selection courses. While his main focus has been for these tactical athletes, he also has experience designing strength and conditioning programs for the general population and endurance athletes ranging from the mile to the half marathon. Chris and I have actually been talking since about 2015 on Reddit, I think it was. If I recall, the first conversation we had was about running shoes and foot strike. I remember having my phone on. Yeah. We were talking about like the New Balance, the barefoot shoes and foot strike and I don't know, all this nerdy stuff.
Oh, wow. Okay. So going on 8 years now.
Yeah. It's been a while. So good times. And then Joe is a multidisciplinary expert specializing in both strength and conditioning as well as performance nutrition, with a Master of Science in Strength and Conditioning already under his belt and another master's degree in nutrition nearing completion. He possesses a unique blend of academic rigor and practical experience. His ultimate aim is to leverage this comprehensive skill set to empower tactical professionals, helping them optimize their performance on and off the battlefield. Joe's education and certifications underscore his commitment to fusing the realms of physical fitness and nutritional science to yield evidence-based, impactful results. And Joe is also a coach in the training group that Chris runs.
Yep. I've known Chris for what's going on, like 4 or 5 years now? Since COVID, right?
Yeah.
Probably. Crazy times.
Good deal. I thought we'd start with just seeing your guys' background. So I thought we'd start with Chris, explain kind of how you got into coaching from cross country and that whole journey.
So I think my high school coach was super into learning about training stuff. He's always on his computer, English teacher kind of just letting the class read while he kind of looked at stuff on his Mac like all day long for like what our team's training was going to look like that season or whatever, He had a copy of Jack Daniel's running formula like on his desk that I just kind of picked up one day. I was a freshman in high school. I'm like, well, what's this? And not really giving it just a little glance, not really understanding what the hell I was reading and whatever. But that kind of started like what I guess you would call the journey from then to now to what I know about conditioning mostly. I think that's probably like my area of expertise for like a bunch of different sports. But so like after graduating, I kind of just realized that kind of talking on these forums about running, it seemed like nobody knew what they were doing. And especially for people preparing for selection, it seemed like you had a lot of former power sport athlete types trying to run a ridiculous amount of miles to get ready for running because they thought that that's what they needed to do. If you Google what running training looks like, that's what comes up. And that's not really the case. And they end up hurting themselves quite a bit, trying to accumulate all this volume. So I guess from there, I just kind of morphed into learning more about what run training can look like, aerobic training can look like for non-traditional, just like non-distance athletes. Like they don't have that background. How do you convert somebody from being, a linebacker or something into a decent runner for these various distances that you have to test for and build resilience for time on feet, all the mileage that you're going to accumulate in selection or in your training. And then that led me into Alex Viada's space, which is hybrid athlete or hybrid athletics. And that was brings me to now, where I kind of learned how to merge the two and be able to progress disparate qualities across somebody's training. So
Yeah, that's a big problem I saw a lot too. I think we used to talk about it all the time. People running way too many miles. You were actually the first person that explained that to me, because I was also a cross country runner and I was over here just running like 60 miles a week and I was trying to lift, and you were like, "Hey man, the miles are not the goal. Like the adaptation is the goal."
exactly. Yeah. So and you can accomplish that in a number of ways. You need the effect most of the time, not the, it doesn't, if you're wanting to be like a good runner, but you need to progress other qualities, it's not going to look like a traditional program, right? It's not going to look like one of the templates in Jack Daniel's book. It's going to be very, very different. So
Right. Yeah. I got a handful of questions we can go back to, but first, Joe, do you want to talk about your background? You've got your master's in exercise science, and then you're doing your master's in nutrition. So I'd be interested to hear your journey to that and what led you to getting the double master's.
Well, so it all started off with during COVID. I wanted to, actually, it was before COVID, wanted to get into the space, or at least the performance space. I always wanted to do something within the military, and I figured I could get into some sort of training with that since I liked performance training. Since I was in undergrad, I really got into lifting, not as much running like Chris has, or yourself, but I got into more of the weightlifting side of things and the strength stuff. So I guess that's a traditional path for strength coaches, because I played football and did all that sort of stuff. So I wanted to get more education within it. And so that's what led me to my first master's, strength and conditioning, through the University of Wisconsin River Falls. Studied under Dr. Zach Rohrg. And so he really opened up my eyes to non-traditional strength training. So kind of not going directly off of what you see in Western side. His program was more built on fascial training, fascial lines, kind of more of the Soviet approach to training, which has been a little bit more interesting than, I guess, you're going to do your 3x8s or 4x10s, or you have to do your Olympic weightlifting and all that sort of stuff. So we did multiple different things to get the adaptation that you're looking for. Everyone says strength is king, but you also need to be able to move, especially as a tactical athlete. So being able to move under load, having that ruck on you, having all the gear and how it's shifting. So having your body be resilient enough to withstand that. And during that time, I started realizing that that side of the house is important, but the nutrition side is just as important. And a lot of people are missing that connection between the two, because I feel like they can eat whatever they want. And maybe when they're 22 years old, 18 to 22, they can eat whatever they want and they can get whatever adaptations that they want. But as soon as you start getting into your 30s, late 20s, early 40s, because some of these operators are going till 45, 50, and they're really realizing that they're broken because, one, they had improper training, and two, that their diet consisted of Chipotle and Chick-fil-A for 25 years and just pounding alcohol every weekend. They wish they could go back in time when they're 19, 20 years old, making it out of selection and being like, hey, I wish I knew the things that I know now, when they're hurt and injured, and working with me to get beyond that. So that's what led me to my second master's of, hey, I want to get more of that nutrition side of the house and being able to merge it all together to really help those tactical professionals be successful, not only in selection courses, but throughout their career, so they can leave the military, hopefully not as broken, because as you see them and they're not doing too hot when they leave and they want to fix themselves. And I don't like seeing that. So having more of that preventative approach is kind of my mindset now.
So with that preventative approach for tactical athletes, they're always traveling, staying in hotels, all that stuff. I imagine it's pretty complicated to even reach some of these guys, because they're like, hey, I'm fine. I look great. I'm fine. I work all the time. I travel. How am I supposed to eat well?
Yeah. So it's going to that having that plan. And yes, when you're downrange or when you're deployed or when you're on a certain mission set, you may not have access to all the proper nutrition that dietitians can tell you, like, we want you to eat your fruits and vegetables and stuff. You might not have access to that. And so it's during those time frames of, one, what can you do with the equipment that you have? So if you have MREs, that's what you have. You have MREs, you can't do anything about it. But what you can do prior to getting deployed and prior to going on these special mission sets is making sure that you are having sound nutrition, having the micronutrients that you need through the fruits and vegetables and a balanced diet, and not consistently eating out and having that inflammatory response with a lot of highly processed foods. And then also having the proper training. So they're not just consistently beating themselves down in the gym. Cause yes, I know everyone loves CrossFit and everyone loves that feeling of getting smoked, but is that really getting you to being the best that you can be for when you go out? Because if you're slightly injured before you go on target and you're doing the thing that you need to do, and then all of a sudden you tweak your back because your gear's too much or you rotate in a certain way, I mean, that one puts you in danger and then puts your teammates in danger as well. So having it all together is really important. Chris can definitely piggyback off of that as well.
I mean, I guess the thought that popped into my mind is just like the types, if we're going to talk about technical athletes, the types that tend to be trying to be, operators and stuff, like just have this amazing and certainly important mindset of just wanting to work really, really hard in their training. And that can actually be kind of a bad thing if you don't, if you as a coach don't pull the reins on them, right, for their training, and they kind of they want to fall into there's a pitfall of like the memes of like energy drinks and, nicotine and bad nutrition. And all I need in the morning is a Monster and a candy bar or whatever, whatever you want to say. And they go and do this really amazing workout. Like Joe said, that can certainly be something that they can do when they're younger, but later on, it definitely catches up with you. So
Do you find that you have guys coming to you and they're not so open to you guys pulling the reins back, and they're like, no, screw you. I've been doing this for years. I'm fine.
Yes, until they end up in a recovery unit and they're broken and they're just like, damn, I wish I didn't do those things. So it's harder with younger people because they feel like they know that, I mean, people do know their bodies better than their coaches. I'm not going to lie. They know what's going to work for them in the sense of, hey, I'm not hurting today. But us as coaches can see an athlete dragging in the gym and they're like, no, I still want to push myself. It's like, no, I'm literally looking at you and you can barely move in the gym right now. So I think that goes to the importance of watching people warm up, or even pre-session, like if you're doing online training, like messaging them like at the midpoint in the week, like, how are you feeling type of thing? Like, are you dragging? Or I don't know if you use Train Heroic or not, but on Train Heroic, you can have those subjective scores, like how you feeling today? Are you drained? Are you tired? So just consistently looking at it as the coach and being like, hey, I actually need to pull this athlete back. You can then change their plan in the app then, and they're just like, oh, what happened to it? I don't remember like it changing, but it changed. And be like, well, I gotcha. So
sometimes the like if they have a bad session and they're like, they come to you at the end of the week and they're like during their check-in and they're saying like, dude, I don't know what happened this week. Like all my lifts went down, like the run was super bad, whatever. And you ask them like, oh, well, like what's been happening? Like what's going on outside of training, right? Because this is an hour to 2 hours of your day. It's not your entire day. Like what else is going on with you? Like, oh, well, I partied two nights out of this week, or, I didn't eat. I was working too much, like there's all these things that kind of will reinforce the fact that, you're not just telling them things just to tell them things. Like a bad session or a bad training week will reinforce the fact that they need to be on top of everything else in order for their training to be super fruitful.
So especially when it comes to working with online athletes, like in your training group or some of the one-on-one remote athletes you might work with, how do you keep in mind, like tactical athletes have a lot of schedules that change last minute. So how do you work around all the different factors? Not like you said, not just training, but you've got last minute work schedule changes. You've got like night ops where they don't sleep that much, like all the stuff that goes into it.
You're asking me or Joe?
It's open to both of you.
So having plans, when you're building out a good plan for training, right? especially working with tactical athletes, you're not going to focus on one muscle group at a time. Like you're not going to have, like I'm doing a bench day to day, because if you're only having one chest push, whatever you want to call it, type of day, and then they have a night mission or their work schedule changes and they're doing, duty shift for, 12 hours, 24 hours, they miss that window. And then what are they going to do? Not go again for another week. So it's building those training plans where you're hitting maybe full body, or you're doing some sort of split where it gives them at least one time a week, maybe 2 times a week of hitting a pattern that you want to hit. So that's kind of the way that I've built it out. I think right now, and as of 2023, Joe believes that full body training is a good thing for most tactical athletes, just in case that they are getting that. Now, if they aren't on the deployment schedule or they're not dealing with shift work or anything like that, then building more of a traditional split could work for that person. So, but if they're moving a lot, if they're doing a lot of things, full body training, I think is the way to go, just in case they miss consistently throughout the week or whatever's going on in their lives.
But yeah, I agree. I think there are also some other instances where maybe you can't train at all for maybe for some span of time. I just had an athlete go to Japan for 2 weeks, and he told me he basically could get nothing yet because he was in the field almost the entire time. And it's just, that's fine. I think, I don't even think you need to deal with any sort of like real detraining. You just kind of pick it up, back up again when they get back and when they're able to. So,
and a lot of these, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, a lot of these people too, when they do go on a deployment like that, and they are 2 weeks in the field or something, they are moving around. They are being active. They're usually under with their gear. They're doing a lot of things that they need to act. They're doing their job. And that's what the difference is between a person who likes bodybuilding or weightlifting and then someone who's training for performance. The goal is to get them to be able to do their job, not being able to perform in the gym. So when they're out there actually doing what they need to do, then it's fine. And also if you're deployed for 6 months or wherever you're going, a lot of times they have something that an athlete can do. Sandbags, body weights, a lot of spots nowadays have treadmills and ellipticals at their fob. So it all depends.
So with all those variables though, there's also a recovery component that comes with some of it, right? Because this population tends to feel like they're bulletproof and can do everything. So do you guys run into, guys last minute night up or something, and they're still trying to crush it in the gym and just running themselves into the ground?
I have not run into that yet, actually.
I have seen people that I've worked with that consistently try and do stuff like that. And it's just telling them like, hey, you need to recover. But a lot of times that's their way of dealing with a lot of stress that they're under. And they feel like that's the only way they're going to relieve it, or they're going to, explode where they're at. So it's that balance of like, hey, maybe we give you a 30-minute window or 25-minute window, 20-minute window where you crush yourself in that time and you can't go beyond that, just so they do get that release that they have. Because the last thing you want to do is they're under the stress of the job, they're under the stress of the mission, they're under the stress of being away from their families. And the only thing that they have is that exercise that they can control. So it's giving them a certain period and a certain parameters, and hopefully they listen to that.
So going back to something we've kind of touched on a few times on performance. When I was coming up through getting interested in training, there wasn't much. It was either like bodybuilding or CrossFit. CrossFit was the only like performance real focus. But even then that was a little, not for some people. And so I was training for the Navy. So that was very performance focused, but now like hybrid training has become very popular with like people on YouTube putting out videos and stuff. And that's kind of more performance focused. So we all have that kind of background of focusing on performance, but I was interested, me and Chris come from an endurance background. Joe, you come from a more strength background, like what your takes are on hybrid training for, civilians competing in maybe like triathlons and powerlifting or any mix of that, versus what tactical athletes have to train for and deal with. Like, what's the difference there? What are some of the similarities there?
I think some of the differences are that, like, if you're on the civilian side, if you're trying to be like a hybrid athlete, so ultra marathons and strength training like yourself, you get to choose what you want to train for. Whereas with anybody trying to prepare for a selection or an academy, you have to train you have to train your limiter. I think is probably at least that's where I go with that's where my head goes to with my athletes is that if we do a battery of assessments and whatever is lacking is kind of like what we need to focus on. So that was the first thought that came into my head.
I would agree with Chris on that. And I would also say that the civilian side, they can a lot of times have more choice in their training schedule and how to build something out. As you know, being in the Navy, you may get tasked out and that task may take you think it's going to take you 2 hours, ends up taking 5 and you're kind of just SOL and then there goes your day. Or you think you're going to have an 8-hour shift and it turns out to be, 15. So it's those things that the military controls over civilians having more of a say. Like if a lot of times in the civilian world, you got a 9 to 5 job, it's that 9 to 5. Military, you could get tasked out. You could have that PT in the morning and it's nothing that you want to do. And you want to get your training session in, but life happens and you can't. So it's being able to work around schedules like that and not having as much autonomy as the civilian side. So I think those are the two biggest differences in the way. And then also probably some like self-perception of what the military should be. I know I've dealt with a lot of people wanting to look and perform a certain way just because they wear the uniform. And sometimes that's just not realistic with either the timelines that they have or just who they are as a person. So there's that as well.
Do you guys have anyone that you work with that's dealing with the military side of things and they're training for some sport on their own personally? Or is everybody you guys work with really just training for the job?
I haven't had anyone train for a certain sport within the military other than just doing like regional CrossFit stuff. I haven't had anyone like actually trying to do like ultra marathons or anything like that.
A certain Ranger friend of ours, loves the, former, I can't remember what position he played, football, but like he's huge, right? Like he's jacked out of his mind, but like also like a really good runner and he loves running. I wrote 2 programs for him in the past few years because he was just trying to, I think once he actually had a test for something, his 2-mile time or whatever. And then the other one was just kind of him just running and trying to get better. I don't think he's raced in anything lately, but that's probably the only one I know that's doing like a sport on top of their job.
When it comes to designing programs in your like online training group, you're designing really like a one-to-many program where you've got a lot of people doing the same program. So how do you approach that versus your like one-to-one clients?
I think, I mean, for both of them, there's certainly like a progression that I have in mind. It's changed over the years for the training group. I think lately we've been doing like more of like a traditional periodization where we do like an accumulation phase, an intensification phase, and a realization phase. And you just kind of hop on, right? Like you just follow along and there's not really any modifications for you as an individual. Whereas with my one-to-one athletes, so again, I do like a battery of assessments. And then from there, we look at what's lacking. And I kind of design the program around those limiters. So I'll take 1 to 2 qualities and kind of sit down and say, hey, we're going to maintain strength, for example, but your 2-mile time is kind of slow. So we focused more on speed development, aerobic development, and everything else kind of supports that. And if that were the case, if aerobic fitness was lacking, and it's just the opposite for everything else. We maintain at a certain volume. We're not progressing it. There's no progression, I guess, for that quality. It's kind of how I do it. I'm actually sure I don't think I've ever heard Joe talk about how he programs.
So like if we're going to talk like an H2F situation and you're working with multiple soldiers at a time, it's building that shell. So you're going to have, you're either going to have like a push, pull, hinge, lunge, rotation, going to different planes of motion. You have ideas of what you want those exercises to be and you place them in. Not every soldier can do that exercise or needs the regression because they're on profile or whatever's going on in their lives. So it's then you go to the individual and modify there. one-to-one clients, like Chris was saying, you have the battery of tests and you kind of know what they're going for. And are they going to a selection course? Are they preparing for SFAS, Ranger School, Ranger Best Warrior, something like that? Or if they're just preparing for an ACFT, or list goes on of preparations. It's like you kind of aim your battery of tests to that, and you kind of mirror that, and you go towards those things. And like Chris was saying before, you go towards their biggest limiter, because that's what's going to end up screwing them over in the long run. On the Army side of the house, which I'm more familiar with than the Navy, a lot of it has to do with aerobic endurance, and then also being able to move under load, especially with the ruck. So that's most people's biggest limiter, is they're not aerobically proficient. They're like, hey, I can run, but they haven't put a ruck on in, 6-7 months, and it ends up breaking them. So kind of working towards that. But like H2F situations, it's mainly working with general population soldiers, if you will. I mean, it's practically general population. So you just got to meet them where they're at and kind of go towards their online training groups with it. I know Chris handles most of that, but it's being able to answer those questions like, hey, I can't deadlift because I don't have access to this. So you just kind of make the modifications there. Or, they don't feel comfortable deadlifting because of whatever reason. So you could try and modify or find a way that you get that same type of pattern. Because at the end of the day, it's not the exercise that you're aiming for, it's the pattern in motion or movement pattern. And so it's kind of like building off of that.
So you guys both work with people training for selection courses, and then maybe people that are already in their jobs. So especially on that training for selection courses side, we can look at the physical demands, but there's also mental demands. So I know from a civilian, like ultra marathon training perspective, a lot of coaches like to put their athletes in like situations that are very challenging to get them in those bad mental places that they have to work through. Do you guys have any of that you incorporate, or is it like solely focused on the physical side?
Truthfully, I haven't done I haven't incorporated a ton of like mental fitness training into the stuff that I do. I think that mostly has to do with the fact that maybe with populations trying to enter a selection tend to already be kind of mentally fit, right? They're up for the challenge. They're emotionally, they deal with stuff pretty well. I think the only thing that I can think of that we've incorporated into the online training group is like the incline carry assessment that we do. That's very uncomfortable. People kind of wake up a little bit when they do that. And it gives them a little bit of exposure to what they can expect, not just from like moving under load, but also like what that feels like from an emotional perspective, like the thoughts that enter your head when you're carrying that thing on a treadmill, like is kind of, it can get really dark or very, I don't know. When I did it, I don't know that I was saying anything else in my head other than, oh shit, oh fuck. Like other than that, I don't think I haven't done a ton of that.
On
Joe,
my
what about you?
end, I guess what I've done is had them journal, like after really tough sessions. Like I'll put left and right limits on something, like I'm going to have you do a really hard run, but your parameter is can only be nasal breathing. Like you can't do anything else. Is it necessarily the best for them? I don't know, but it's putting in some sort of inhibitor to them. So they have to work harder and see how they feel mentally after that situation. Also, time of day training. So, at the heat of the day, like, of course, it's not going to be as long and it's not going to be as intense because I don't want a heat injury. But having them realize that they will have to work in the heat once they're acclimatized. I'm not going to throw anyone in a situation where it's going to be extremely dangerous for them, and then have them journal after that. So the progression of like a 12-week cycle or whatever, from day one to the last day of the cycle, have them look back through their journal and being like, hey, I progressed here, or we're starting to see a trend. Like when they're running and going long distances, they start having a lot of negative self-talk by mile 5 or 6 or something like that. Or we're pushing a certain pace and they have that negative self-talk. It's like, that will only progress further on through a selection. So having them see that now, and they can address it now so they don't have to deal with it later. Or if they are working on it through the selection course, that they know it's there and when it's going to hit them so they can talk themselves out of it.
Yeah. So it sounds like you both kind of implement some sort of what I was explaining about like ultra marathon coaches, putting people in difficult situations, whether it's in regular training or just in an assessment. Either way, I think it's valuable because you really don't know how you're going to react until you're there. Right.
And I've seen CHP. Some CHP programs have I think it's like a long run day or something like that, where they specifically prescribe, hey, no music today. They think about your why. Like there's a prescription for like, hey, you need to think about like why you're doing this ultra marathon or whatever. Yeah. So again, I haven't done a ton of that, but the similarities between the ultra distances and training for selection to me are kind of there in terms of emotional fitness, if you want to call it that.
Totally. Yeah. So go ahead, Joe. Were you going to say something?
Oh, no.
So
Has Fergus like planned anything like that for you before? Programmed anything like that?
I've suspected it at times. He hasn't said it outright, but I've suspected
Yeah.
at times like this is much more volume or intensity than I've been doing. And it's kind of stands out in the program. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I've suspected it. I haven't outright asked him before, but I think he's mentioned that he does that at times. So
Yeah.
I think it's fairly common when training for ultra endurance to like make sure your people experience those negative emotions in training. That way they get experience with it.
Totally.
So you mentioned seeing progress from a like journaling perspective. If like, hey, I felt this way on this run at this time and like I was able to deal with that. So with tactical athletes, they're not training for a sport. Maybe their test like a PRT or an ACFT or something, you could consider that pretty easy. But for people that are training for the job, how do you measure progress? Do you just measure it like in the weight room and running and expect like these are going to carry over this way to their job? Or do you do anything else different?
It's a good question. Yeah, I definitely look at how they're progressing in the training environment. But then also if they're going to the box or if they're going out for a 2 week like field training session or something like that, just seeing how they work then, seeing how they are feeling under load. If they're going to the range, I've talked with some company commanders about getting them to wear full kit when they're doing stuff just to see like, hey, can we actually do the mission set within the gear that we need to use? And then kind of have them report back through that to see how people are doing. But really, I haven't, we're not really at war right now. So you can't really be like, hey, did what we do in the gym and then on the field and like training and stuff like that translate to a mission ready soldier to, go do something. So I guess it's all theoretical right now. Like we're just hoping like a training environment and a training mission can actually mirror what combat operations are going to be like. But, we don't know until we get to that situation.
So when it comes to moving with load, that's a big point of debate online as far as rucking goes. People, you shouldn't like run with the ruck. You shouldn't run with all this load. And then some people swear by it. What is your guys' thoughts and approach on that?
So once again, going down to context and it all depends. I know like Mops and Moes and all of them are like, don't run with the ruck. Don't do that. Maybe not in a training environment all the time. You shouldn't run with it. But if you're going through an army school and you got to make a 12 miler in 3 hours, and you're running out of time and you want to make the school, you're going to run with that ruck. So don't do it all the time, but I think it should be put into a program and properly progressed, or else people are going to hurt themselves when they have to actually do it when it comes to time to do it. Or in real life situations, you could have a load on you and you need to run because you're getting shot at, or, you have creeping mortars, or you have something coming at you. Like you gotta run at points with load. So have the body prepared for it and not be exposed to it at the oh shit point.
Yeah. I mean, I think so. I think everything has an application in the right context, like, like Joe said, but it's like exposure is good. If you're going to encounter that at some point, whether it's on a job or in your academy or your selection, like you need to be exposed to it. So like ruck running specifically. Yeah, probably not all the time. I'd probably save that for like some sort of assessment, some sort of just like a more intense session. Maybe you might do once every I don't even know. Most of the rucking that I prescribe is like zone 2 work. And then every now and again we'll do like that time trial for like see how fast you can do a 12 mile or whatever.
Yeah, dude,
Um,
every 12 to 16 weeks. I don't know, something kind of, it's long enough.
yeah, like once per block. Like
Yeah.
you don't, and then I think maybe I would allow it more for somebody who's very, very aerobically fit. And then even then it's like we're not putting, like 50 pounds on you for the ruck run. I'd probably do like 10. But I don't know. It really depends. It's hard to prescribe that like in a group setting, which is why I do it so sparingly. I think one to one, you just know an athlete a lot better, and you know what their capabilities are and what they can tolerate, and you know obviously like what their previous training looks like and how they've been feeling lately, and so that can kind of dictate or guide you as to where you place that in a program. I don't know.
I guess one of my mentors told me that professional sport, tactical athlete, it's not good for the body. None of this is good for the body. We're not, we can't say that we're here to, make them, I guess where I'm going with this, none of this job is good for the body. So we got to give them situations where they're training to be robust enough and also prevent injuries. So it's that reactionary, not being reactionary, like I was saying before. So it's being proactive with our stuff. So I don't agree with ruck running, but it's in there. So therefore, at certain times, we want to see how they respond to it. And I'm not going to have some brand new private go ahead and run ruck who's never done it before. Not going to happen. But if I have a sergeant who's been doing it for a while, he's physically fit, he's not having any super bad injuries, kind of see where he's at because he's already gone through airborne and air assault and he wants to go to the Q course. So just like they're going to put themselves through something. So are you going to be the one that's going to give them the right prescription, or are they going to do it on their own? Because eventually they're just going to do it. So it's like, you got to feed the itch a little bit because I've seen that. And at the same time, some athletes will just go and do it a lot and be totally fine. Mm-hmm.
Right? So like you're defying kind of like what everyone else is kind of saying about like, hey, you probably shouldn't do a ton of this. They go and do it anyway, and then they get super fit. And that's kind of funny to me, but
it works when they're young. And that's the thing. I mean, this sport,
yeah,
and the tactical game is a young man sport. I mean, really, that's why the average for military is 18 to 45. It's that ballpark, because as soon as you hit that point, there is a breaking point where if you're 40 years old, I'm not saying that everyone can do it, but you hit that point where like, I can't wear an 8-pound ruck and carry, my full kit and go do a 12-mile ruck without having a week's worth of recovery time because of that. So there's a reason there's, field grades and stuff like that. So the young man's game, and it's us as coaches trying to make it so when they do get to that point about when they're about to leave the military, or even as a master's athlete, that they're able to function appropriately and have a generally healthy, productive life after their time in service and or sport.
Yeah. So with both, I don't know, Joe, how much you work with Gen Pop other than what you would say like the Gen Pop Army. Chris, I know you said you work with some Gen Pop. So from that instance, what I think has been really good coming out of maybe professional sport and higher level like tactical athletes is that focus on how do we get these guys to be able to do their job for a long time when their job is hard? Like how do we increase longevity? And I think that has good applications, some of the research that's been done and stuff for everyday Gen Pop people, because, even to be a healthy 70, 80-year-old is, very hard. Do you think that there's any lessons from like the tactical population other than like longevity that can be taken in when you train Gen Pop? Or is it more just like this job is just really hard and it's not optimal and you probably shouldn't train like this?
Joe, you go first. I want to stick on that one for a second.
So I did used to work with Gen Pop before I guess I fell into the tactical realm, and Gen population coming from where I was is meeting them where they're at and not, I guess, making them something that they don't want to be. Because at the end of the day, they're paying you for your services and you're giving them what they want. So it's their goals. So like if you have a client who wants to get generally healthy, I'm not going to prescribe them something that is going to make them an ultra marathoner if they don't want to be. So it's meeting them where they're at, trying to have them function at the best possibility where they are, and also working within their time frame and time limits and what they have access to. Military side of things, trying to build in like on top of that is, I guess, more structure in the sense of like, you're going to be at XY time and then you're going to be doing XYZ and it's going to run it through a rotation of exercises. So I guess you could put that into like a exercise class or whatever to kind of function that way. But I guess the correlations are very similar between H2F and then Gen Pop. It's just meeting where people are at, because a lot of times, even though they're coming to H2F or working at their unit, they don't want to be there. And I guess a lot of general population are doing it because they know they have to do it, if that makes sense. So it's I don't know. It's difficult because we want them to be the best they can be. And sometimes they don't want that. Unless you're working with a hybrid athlete who's coming to you because they want to run, an ultra marathon and all that sort of stuff. Then they're really intrinsically motivated to figure out that goal. And so you have a lot better options to work with them, or working through selection. So I think that's kind of why we gravitate towards those people, is because they want to push themselves. But most of the times, general population, general soldiers don't want to do that. They just want to go do everything else but they have to do it. So I don't know if that helped.
Yeah. I find I have with ultra runners that I work with the same kind of conversations we talked about earlier. I have people like, hey, I want to run 5-6 days a week. And I want to lift 5 days a week. And I want to walk like 5 miles a day. And I want to, basically just kill myself every day. And it's like, also I want to look, shredded. So I've been eating 1,300 calories a day and like, I'm tired. Do you know why? It's like, yeah, I do.
Yeah. So I guess my take is just probably adaptability is like a really good lesson that you can take away from tactical athletes too, and applying that to like a general population. It's just, it's okay to, if not every session is the best, it's okay if you have to miss one because family or work or other obligations that pop up. I mean, like if Gen Pops aren't professional athletes, right? You don't have to be there necessarily. It's kind of you and your goals. Like Joe said, it's their context is so different. And a lot of people don't understand that context exists outside of theirs. And so you just kind of have to understand who it is that you're working with. But I think adaptability is one that you can really take away from like the tactical athlete space and apply to a Gen Pop and say like, hey, like if somebody's kind of neurotic about their training, like, okay, I missed this training session, like I feel really bad about it, or like they're getting kind of worked up about something like that. You just kind of lend them a little bit of kindness and compassion and help them understand that it's not a super huge deal. You just push it back, or you shift everything to the right on the calendar.
Resilience too. I would say that's a big thing from the military, going to Gen Pop. You get knocked down, can you get back up and, figure it out and move forward? Yeah. I would say the military does an excellent job at that. I would say any real, I guess, first responder too, like being in that tactical professional space, a lot of that is ingrained into us. So
I feel like too, a lot of the people that I know in various military branches and the military in general, like to be a coach, you have to, at least have some education or like certified. And a lot of people that I know are very aware of like, hey, is this person that's giving me stuff, like, do they know what they're talking about? Whereas a lot of Gen Pop follow, to no fault of their own, because they don't know, fall into like, oh, this person like has a nice ass on Instagram and it sells the training program, so I'm going to buy it.
yeah. Or that they have a lot of Instagram followers. And, I see that with a lot of young soldiers, like, hey, I want to look like so-and-so. And it's just like, well, you're not on all the PEDs they're on. you don't have all day to train and dedicate, your diet and recovery and everything like they do. So, and you don't have their genetics, but what you do have is, us coaches and, dietitians and stuff at your disposal to help you with your progress and help you with the job, and also have you not end up on profile.
So do you guys find you along those same lines, do you guys find you answer a lot of the same common questions around things people see online that are like, just somebody trying to sell something and they come to you and they're like, hey, this thing looks great. And you're just like, no. And that's not cool.
Yes. The mileage question gets brought up a lot. Do I need to be running a ton of miles to adequately prepare for any selection or academy or whatever? And then I think to some extent strength numbers come up a lot, maximal lifts. And both of those things are just kind of like, I think there's bigger fish to fry than just running miles and just being super strong. Although I guess, as they say, strength is never a weakness, but you don't get tested on it, right? So those two are probably big ones for me.
I would agree on that. And then, just piggybacking, you don't need a 1 rep max strength. Like, no selection course does it. It's not, it's just showing that you're generally strong in that one spot. It's like, I don't think anyone should be maxing out unless you're doing it for your sport. That's my 2 cents. I guess what I see the most with me is, can you make me a meal plan? The answer is, I can. I'm not going to, because you're not going to follow it no matter what I do. I'll hand it. Just going to throw it out the window because Saturday rolls around and you want to drink your 12 beers and go to Chick-fil-A. Not just like, all right. So meal plans, not going to happen. Supplements, no, you should not be taking SARMs. No, you should not be going through that. You're going to get popped on a drug test and it's just not worth it. Go speak with your medical doctor if you feel like you're low on testosterone, and they'll test you. Supplements wise, like greens, powder, all that sort of stuff. Why not? Like, try it. See if it makes you feel better. I'm not going to tell you to go buy certain supplement and stuff like that, but do some research on your own to see if it's going to actually improve your performance. Because I know BCAAs, everyone demonizes them, but like, what if you're not eating enough protein? Like, you're just not doing it. Like, why not take it to see if it does help you? Because if you're a soldier who eats, like a bird, and you tell them to eat more, yet they're not going to, but they're willing to take the supplement. Sometimes you take the battles you can win. So you just give them the education that they need. What other random questions do I get? Oh, here's a good one. Is it a good idea to do extreme weight cut for height and weight? Answers no, because you're going to get hit with a PT test same day. I know the Army's trying to get rid of that. A lot of places have, but doing an extreme cut to make height and weight doesn't make sense. So just try and make a healthy lifestyle. If you know you're going to fail height and weight, probably fail it this time around and then work towards passing it the next time, because trying to push yourself and kill your metabolism and a lot of your body is not good for that one spot. You might, feel the repercussions of it, but build on so you don't fail it next time.
Yeah. A lot of people I work with do the same thing. They'll cut like crazy, then feel horrible during the test. Granted, the Navy's test isn't super hard, but still. Chris, I'd like to ask you, we've mentioned it a few times and we all understand it, like what you mean by it, but that you shouldn't just run more miles. Like, that might not make a lot of sense to people who are coming from, like runners just run more miles. Like, these professional runners run 100-mile weeks. So if I have to go run, 100 miles in this, selection course over the span of a week or two, I should just run more. So like, can you explain why that's not optimal?
Yes. God, I was waiting for this. Okay. So it's like, one of the main problems that I think some of these athletes have with mileage is that there's a number in their head that they think will kind of be like the magic. Like, if I get to here and I get to that volume comfortably and I can sustain that, then I'll be good. And that's not exactly what that means. Any number you throw out there, 30, 40, 50, 60 miles per week, is very arbitrary. I don't think that there's any evidence to support, I don't know how you would track which candidates are doing what type of training as they're going. I don't think they really do that. I think they take into account like some of your like sport history and stuff, but it's not, it's just, gosh, this just bothers me so much. It's not the best way to go about training. It's like there's so many other ways to improve aerobic fitness. First of all, the accumulation of mileage, like the progression that people tend to use, the 10% rule, I think is very flawed. Again, it's just arbitrary, right? So for me, if I'm looking at stressors, I consider mileage like its own stimulus. So if I wanted to progress someone from 0 to, or let's say from like 10 to 30 to 40, it's not going to be 10, 12, 16, 22, like all the way up to the number that they're trying to get to. That might be okay if the rest of their training is maybe static and they're not trying to progress something else actively, in my opinion. But I'd rather see someone at 15 miles per week for a month. And then this is kind of like a Jack Daniel's suggestion, right? The physiologist, not the distiller, where he says you got to hold a certain volume for about a month, give or take, and then you add a mile per training run for like within your training week with a cap of 10 miles per week, which again is still kind of arbitrary, but I think it's less so because you're allowing somebody to adapt to a stress, to the mileage increase for a while before putting on another one. And in my opinion, if somebody wanted to get to really high mileage training with their running, that's how you would do it. It's kind of like this stepwise sort of progression instead of this linear, arbitrary 10% rule that everybody likes to use. I just don't think it has any bearing on there's other things that you could be doing to be fitter and to increase your chances of passing or really try to reduce your risk of injury. And the risk of injury actually goes up if you're trying to linearly increase your volume all the time with no deload or with no end in sight, like, but
I feel like the 10% rule kind of came out of this time where people were, this is just speculation on my part. Maybe it came out of something else, but people were hurting themselves because they're doing too much. And so it was like a limiter, like, hey, you should slow down and not progress too quickly. Like when I learned about it, that was the context I learned about it from.
Sure. But even then it's just doing like a blanket prescription for everybody is again, context matters. So I just don't like it as a progression model for mileage. But I guess the other side of that also, for like as it pertains to selection, is people think that they're going to be running at easy pace or at their zone 2 PT1 pace, and that's not what happens, right? It's this it's this very slow shuffle that's in the 11 plus minute range, right, per mile. Like it's really slow, and which is actually kind of harder and way more inefficient than actual running at your zone 2 pace. And so in that instance, I think like rucking and strength training is going to be it's a bigger hitter for you. Like if you're trying to get into selection, you need the aerobic fitness to sustain all of that or to like prop all that up. But it just bothers me so much because I see so many people getting hurt trying to accumulate all these miles. It's not, there's other areas of your fitness that needs attention, likely, there's gotta be like a curve, right? Somewhere around there, like where you're not getting back what you're putting in at that point. At that point, you're just a runner.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's the kind of the definition of, one of the definitions of hybrid, right? Cutting out all the excess and just the essential.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
So being mindful of time, if anybody's like listening, they're like, hey, I'd be interested in this training group, or like, I realize this isn't, I'm not doing things correctly and I don't really know how to do things. Where can they get in touch with you guys, find more out about your training group or one-on-one coaching or anything like that?
Are you taking athletes right now?
Very sporadically, I'm taking athletes just because work and school is little niche at the moment, but I guess you could find me at Joe Dzubak on Instagram. That'd probably be the best way you could get in touch with me. And then also on the training group with Chris, I check in, once in a blue moon to kind of see what's going on in there.
Once per quarter.
Once per quarter.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, Instagram would probably be the best way to get in touch with me. I got also Gmail at the same Gmail. So
Yeah, for me, I guess it'd be Christopher Runs on Instagram and sucks@css@gmail if you want to talk about one-to-one training.
That Gmail sucks@css. This will all go in the show notes too. And Chris, you're pretty active. Are you still pretty active on Reddit or not so much?
Not so much. I guess I took over our hybrid athlete, not affiliated with, CHP or anything, but it's really quiet right now. But I do see a lot of interest on that subreddit about like people asking what is hybrid training. I'm hoping to be a little more active on there and just kind of explain stuff. I did one case study on like, if you wanted to combine a running program with like 5-3-1, how would you do that? And so that's on there. That was a little popular. But yeah, I hope to be more active on there and kind of explain a little more what hybrid training is and how to program intelligently for it. Same username, Christopher Runs with a Z.
Good deal. So before we hop off, is there anything like last minute you guys were hoping to touch on?
I think we should do it again.
Yeah, it was fun. We should definitely do it again.
I think it'll be good to get like feedback and see what people are really wanting to learn more about nutrition, strength and conditioning wise.
Yeah. We can definitely get some questions together and do this again.
I'm super interested in ranting again. So
okay, we can rant about mileage.
If I find another question that really gets me hot and bothered, and we can do that.
I'll just like get a ton of people to ask me, hey, like, cool, but like he doesn't know what he's talking about mileage, and then I'll show them to you, and you can just get all upset.
We'll talk about shin splints and running.
There you go.
And running shoes, that'd be a good one. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Well, good to talk to you guys. And I guess I'll see you guys next time we do this.
Yep. Thank you.
See you guys.
Yeah. See you guys.